everybody, welcome back to Reaper Pro Tips with me, your host, and Disembodied Hands Queen Quindy, and our devoted minions, sometimes, Justice and John. And Lazy Kiki's back by her door, so I'm afraid there's no Kiki morning. Unless she decides. Usually when she hears my intro, she comes to jump up, but lately she's just been like, nope. So, she's growing up, I guess. So, I mean, it's good not to get nommed in the morning. And her nomming is definitely dropping off too, her mouthing. Although we've been pretty hardcore on it lately, so. Lazy Kiki. Yep, Lazy Kiki. She's got her chew and she's got her cold door, like cracked open the door for her, so yeah. So definitely, and maybe that means that eventually I can get her in here with me, but she really loves when the door back there gets cracked open. She really loves to lie right next to it, so. Because for this time of year anyway, it's cold air, and she likes that because she's got that coat. So yeah, hey Jacob Jansen, long time no see. Here we are. I had my 20-year anniversary with Reaper the other day, Jacob. 20 years, 2 decades. It's a lot of my life. It's a lot. So yeah. And, let me see. I think I have a tiny puppy picture. We were comparing one of the girls to my Blazy, Kiri's daughter. But she has one girl who's really, really light colored, really light gray. Might turn out to be a really light gold. And then the other girl is more reddish gold, like her mama. So they're tiny little puppy pods right now. I need to get my flight arranged out there so that I can go do the stuff. Yeah, 20 years is pretty crazy, huh? So these are Kiki's half siblings. So Mama Zam is Kiki's mama, but the daddy is named Tuka, and he's a handsome dog. So yeah, I got baby puppy pictures. Alrighty. There's your puppy dose this morning. So I'm trying to get all the crap out of my. All the crap out of my stuff here. There. Excellent. I am now arranged. So, yeah, they're tiny, tiny babies. They were born, I think, they were born Saturday. They were born on my work anniversary, actually. April Fool's puppies, but she's naming them after Critical Role again, this time the second campaign. Because Bridget is obsessed. All right. Let's see. What are we doing today? We're doing green work. I want to do some big flagstones on her. And I want to start getting some magical kind of energy going on this guy. I'm debating painting the wire a color. Light, like the vibrant green I was talking about. But I think I'm going to do a bit of texture with super glue first. And then I'll paint over that. And then we'll do the water effects over that. Yeah, she's doing the Mighty Nine. She's doing campaign 2, Agent Marvel. Because Bridget is just a critter. She's a critter. All right, I want to put a little bit, get him on a platform. Get us in focus. Yep, fresh baked puppers. They just popped out of the oven. So yeah, but they're all doing good. Even the one, did I tell you about the April Fool's joke? That they thought Zammy was going to have 6. And then they thought all the puppies had been born. So they let Zammy out to do her potty. And Zammy had a puppy in a snowdrift. That was that really light colored one. So it was April Fool's, there's another puppy. And it's in a snowdrift. But they saved the puppy from the snowdrift. So Bridget said when she came out, she thought actually that the puppy was dead, but she is not dead. She is very much alive. So, because sometimes when you have a really long pause during whelping, the puppy you might not get the puppy out in time. So pauses are natural, but sometimes if the puppy detaches too early, that can be a bad thing. So yes, there are 7. We didn't do bets this time because it wasn't my litter. If Kiki ever has puppies, we'll do the bet again. We'll have a pool on guessing how many puppies there will be. Oh, and I've got some green stuff. I got a fold right here, mold line right here that actually is perfect for green stuffing. So you guys can see that mold line right here. When you've got a recessed mold line like this, at an angle where it's impossible to get a knife in there, the answer is green stuff or filler of some sort. You're going to just have to kind of fill over that line, unless you are using, you might be able to use a Dremel tool, like the nail Dremel tool like I have. On Bones USA, that actually works pretty well, so you could use that to get in there and get that out of there, or you could just do green over it. And since I'm doing green work today, I'll just use some of my green to fill in this mold line. You getting your fresh baked baby cows right now? Yeah, it's that season. Alrighty, so let's do a bit of super glue, like Julie said. So wire can be very slippery, and if you're trying to put green over the armature, you either want to use really, really goopy green and kind of like, you know, let it set all over the armature and hope that it sticks, or as Julie said, you can use a little bit of super glue to add some texture, which the green will stick to the glue a lot better than the bare metal. So we're going to just do a little bit of glue. Little beads of glue, and this should give us a bit more for our green stuff to stick to. And the super glue is really not going to build up much texture, though you can add a fair bit, but look out for drippies. You don't want it to drip everywhere, right? So let's get our knife tip, and if you have to adjust any glue, if you think you've gotten too much of a gloop and it's going to drip down into the plastic, just take your knife, kind of dab it over any area you want it on. And this bead of glue is a little bit much for that area. And I've got a big dribble here, so I'm going to spread that around. I use my knife tip because anything that's steel is very easy to take the glue off of. I think that's pretty good. And you could use a pokey tool too. So we've got a big dribble here. And I can pretty much play with it as it starts to dry. It's not going to be as fun to play with as the water effects will be though. So mostly I'm just trying to get some of this excess glue to go onto other parts of the wire and not be any like really huge drops where I don't want them. So you can see that big drop that's going right in there. So we'll try to bring that down a little bit. And they will tend to move with gravity and slide along the wire. And I don't mind if it connects a little bit to the rest of the thing, because it'll actually make this wire a little more solid if it connects. So I've actually got a bit of glue connecting these parts right here. Honestly, Agent Marvel, what I usually use is the side cutters, like for big rough stuff anyway. So like if I want to cut off pieces of black plastic base, I'll do this. If you're just shaving down a little bit of base, then the knife. But I honestly would use the side cutters. Plastic is soft, and any side cutters should be rated for that. Unless it's really thick, then it might give you some trouble, but this is in between gel tip. This is Zap-A-Gap Medium CA+. They have a much more liquidy super glue, which I would definitely not use for this. You could use a gel glue. Gel glue would be really good for this. You could even sculpt a little bit for it. My gel glue is in the other room, so I decided to just use this. Really, all that we're doing here is putting a thin skin. We're not trying to sculpt, really. We're just trying to put a thin skin of super glue over the top of the brass rod, which will enable the green stuff to stick to it better. Or, sorry, the water effects to stick to it better. It'll give us something to work from. But I don't like gel generally, and I don't like really, really slippery stuff, really, really liquid stuff. The really liquid stuff only works if you have a perfect fit, and the gel stuff, although it is easy to work with, is less strong, to be honest. The thing you sacrifice when you go for the gel glue is that it is not as strong. It doesn't hold things together as well. as thinner glue. So once again, we're dealing with kind of chemistry and physics on that. Now, if you're working with plastic models, the gel glue is probably just fine, but for metal, definitely, you'll notice that it's weaker. And it may also shatter easier if you drop a model and the pieces pop apart and you use gel glue. It's not really a surprise. Yeah. It's easier to place it and to put it, places, but it has its downsides. Everything has a strength and a weakness. The gel glue is great because it'll fill gaps, right? And it won't run. But it also isn't as strong of a holder. Yeah, I mean, like I said, if you're working with plastic and stuff, it doesn't really matter much with Sonoma. And if you're working with styrene, you should be using a styrene glue. I mean, you can use regular super glue with styrene, but if you use a plastic glue that's made for styrene, then it will actually melt the parts together and you will have an unbreakable bond. It just needs to be used very persnickety. It's, because it's thin. Yeah, it depends on exactly what you're doing. Like on a slotted base, if I have to cut off a big part of slotted base, I just use the side cutters. I just do it in little bits, just like when I cut a base off of these minis, I'll start with a small snip and then I'll just widen it out. So don't try to do a huge thing at once, Agent Marvel. But if you have to remove significant parts of black plastic base, then I would use side cutters to start out, to rough out. Then I would use the knife to like refine it. That's what I would do. So yeah. So all right, so we've got that. I think I don't have too many blobbles and bubbles. Maybe a little bit. That's okay. This is starting actually to set up pretty well, the glue is. So I'm going to leave it. I'm going to actually put it up right over here, and we will work on our green stuff. But yeah, I use like the steel pins of pokey sticks, or I use my hobby knife to manipulate super glue because I can always, like, it'll come right off of the steel blade. You can always scrape it off with another knife or tool because the glue is softer than the steel. So once it's all set, I can do that. But now let's green. Now, as I mentioned before, if I wanted to make a more realistic, like, cracked slate base, I would probably do what David does and set up wood putty, mix a little sheet of wood putty, let it set, and then just break it, like with the butt of your hobby knife or pin vise or whatever you've got around, or a hammer. David has been known to use a hammer to shatter it into pieces that then look like their actual floor pieces. Oh, I was going to show you guys this Iron Man. Hold on. That's another interesting, could use for a floor thing. Hold on. Papa, I need to show them Iron Man. Where is he? Where is he? Yeah, flop. Where did he put him, Bob? Yeah? Where did he put him? I thought he brought, there he is. I did. Hold on. Let me see if I can find. Might get a Kiki visitation after all. So I'll have to move the models over here so she doesn't get in the way. But Kiki, come up and say hi. Do you want to come up and say hi? Nope. She's like, I've outgrown that. Hold on. Okay, go out. You can go out and move the gate. Yep. You're good. Okay, Baba. You go settle down. You're a good girl. You're a good girl. Okay. So, making sheets of various materials and cracking them manually can give you a very naturalistic effect. This is an example that goes beyond that, and actually he built rebar out of brass rod. Here's David's marble entry. So I use the long applicator, Tyler, so that I don't get glue on my hands. I do every once in a while get dumb and forget and touch something that's got super glue on it. But yeah, so this is David's marble entry. He got silver. He's actually touched it up a bit since he came home. It was like on the verge of gold. But this concrete is plaster. So it's actual, Paris plaster Paris. You can get it anywhere. Mix it up with water and lay it down. And he built the rebar with the brass rod and twisted it together. And then when he broke it with the hammer, the rebar made it possible to twist and distort it so that it looked natural. So this is the kind of thing you can do with various types of putties or plasters if you just lay out a thin sheet for your basing and then crack it with a tool. So yeah, and Big Chimpo's smart. Yeah, he got a silver. It was a really hard judge, he said, Bryce, because that one dude came in with just a lot of amazing entries. Yeah. But he thought that if he would have done a little bit more on the smoke and fire here, it would have gotten gold, because that was their biggest problem with it, is it needed more attention down there where the Hulkbuster was. But yeah. So yeah, so this is an example of when I'm talking about laying down just a thin plate, or in this case, he went thicker because he wanted concrete, right? And that's why I used plaster of Paris, because wood putty, it would take forever to cure at that, and might have been much harder to break if this thickness. So if you're doing a thicker plate or chunks, like a broken down wall, then you want to use something like plaster, where you could easily build up a very thick layer that is still very breakable, because plaster is so very easy to break. And that's the part you have to be careful about, is when you do bring in that hammer or that implement where you're going to break it, be cautious, because you might turn it to powder, right? So you got to be careful about it. There was one guy, Kiriniko, who just turned in amazing work. David was blown away even by his work. So you just got to do it in a box, Big Chimpo. If you break it in a box, then the box will just hold everything. So then you don't have to worry, and then you don't have to clean up. So yeah, or a paint mat or something you could use. But if you really don't want things to hop out, then yeah. So anyway, so when I'm talking about stuff like that, that's what you can do. It's some of the cool things you can do if you get some of those putties and plasters and play around with them, right? Play around with laying out a sheet for basing and then breaking them. Practice breaking. It's never a waste, right? Like if you break one and you get 2 small pieces, then you can use them on a smaller model. And if you get big chunks, you can use them for dragons or something. So it's actually pretty cool what you can do. I was looking for one that he did that was wood putty and thinner, but I didn't find one just quickly. I didn't want to hold up the stream too much. So, yeah. Well, okay, so that should go without saying, but let's just do what Big Chimpo did and make sure that anybody watching this who doesn't understand safety says, make sure you're wearing safety glasses when you hammer and break stuff, obviously. You don't want shards of things in your eyeballs. Because of the rebar, because he built up the plinth, so he drilled out, you can see how he drilled out the plinth and made it rough, right? And he did it on the back too. He broke it up to kind of suggest so this is another thing that David does very well, in my opinion. He'll start with the black plinth like everybody uses, but then he will customize the black plinth with like Dremels and drilling and cutting, and he'll make it fit the personality of the piece, right? So since this was like all cracked and shattering, he actually went that extra mile and he did the crack running up the back and the stuff on the front. But you can see that he's probably just used his brass rod to pin this whole structure into either the putty here, which I see there's a bit of probably putty buildup, or into the wood itself, right? So he's just taking advantage the fact that he already had wire structure built up to drill it right into the wooden base and set it up. Yeah, the plinth is lovely. David does really good. He's really good at that. He's really good at, Oh my. my wedding ring wants to totally stick to my putty. This is not good. This is not a good start. Time to take the ring off. Time to take the ring off. If it's continually wanting to stick to the green stuff, that's a bad sign. It's a sign I should not be wearing my pretty ring while I'm working with green is the reminder right there, right? All right, so there, I can sit over there. But yeah, so that is one way you could do big flagstones. Or if you've got a model where you're just trying to work with the integral base like this, then you can do what I'm about to do, which is to use green. And I'm going to be using probably a bit of plastic card to flatten it out and make it... Yeah, allergies suck. But yeah, so there's one of David's entries for various Adepticon competitions. I'm going to get a bunch of green stuff out. And I'm going to make slightly more yellow because I do want to fill in that that mold line on Erebus, the wizard. The evil wizard. And so I'm going to do slightly more yellow than green. But yeah. But yeah, I really like David's Iron Man. He had a different backdrop on it at first, but this is such a much better execution. I love it when he does funky basing stuff. David always has the best ideas for basing, and sometimes I feel like I don't get to flex that muscle enough, and so I just never think about it, or I'm too lazy about it because I don't have to do it on most models. But yeah, I'll have to make some nice basing for my Golden Demon stuff, so I'll have to think about it. Hello, Nitro. We are doing some basing work today and some green stuff work and some general kind of sculpting work. And I am trying to set up my little spiral here that we're going to turn into some crackling energy in a bit. And in the meantime, I'm doing some green work because I want this lady to have bigger flagstones. I don't like the little cobblestones. I want her to be more like in a graveyard, like walking on like a shattered stone path kind of thing. So, oh, nice, Big Chimpo. Yay! That's super awesome. Thank you. You have accomplished. Give Big Chimpo a gold star. He's accomplished what I set out, the task I set out for you all to do yesterday, which was to make a decision to paint and to follow through on that decision. Awesome. I hope you had fun, because that's really the whole point. So I'm just going to you don't need very much green to fill in a mold line. So I'm just going to squeeze off a little bit and put the rest on my plastic here. It's the best. Slick plastic, like a Ziploc bag, is really the best thing to, just like it, it keeps this from sticking to everything. You can just put your lump of green on it. Yes, achievable small steps. I forget a lot of the time. I forget that I should be doing achievable small steps, and that gets in the way of me getting things done. But okay, let's get out our sculpting tools. This is small stuff here, but I'm going to want a bigger spoon for the big plates. So I want my tiny spoon. Tiny spoon for Erebus here. Sit, green stuff, stay. Sit and stay. Come on, off my fingers. All right. Here's a kapow. Hey, kapow's good. Aw. Okay, but Kodiak, now what you need to do is tell her, okay, last night I watched anime with you, but I really, really want to paint a little bit tonight. Just a little bit. 20 minutes. Not going to take away from her too much. She can have you after. But definitely make sure that there's an equitability there. Because it's often very easy for us to use other people as our excuse. And we definitely want to spend time with our loved ones, so it's not totally an excuse. But if it happens all the time, it's very convenient for us not to get anything done. and not to ever engage our creativity. Because there's always something shiny that we could be doing that doesn't take as much effort. Sitting in front of anime doesn't take much effort. Painting does take effort. So sometimes that's what's really going on. Is our brain is looking for the easy dopamine fix of sitting in front of the anime eating popcorn or whatever. Okay, so I got some water on that area, and now I have to fix that because the green will not adhere if this area is wet. So what happened is I got water on my tool, but I hadn't smushed the green all the way down yet. And so that is what happened. So now we're going to go in there with a Kleenex and just dry it off. Pretty easy. Oh yeah, if she normally doesn't ask, that's different. Yep. Good deal, Shadow Raven, good deal. Yay! Yeah, 90 minutes for sure. Yeah, as I kind of talked about that yesterday too in our, that some of us have brains that really function best in like 90-minute to 2-hour chunks. I have that. But at the same time, I recognize I can get some things done in smaller chunks. So it's okay for me to, when I've got a big goal, like painting, and in the evenings is usually when my painting time is. All right, so what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to fill in that mold line there that we see. And I won't need this much green probably. But it is being kind of persnickety about how it wants to sit. There we go. Once I've got it stuck down, then I can get a little bit more water on my tool. And I can start smoothing it out along that mold line. And the reason we're doing green work to fill in this mold line is because it's convex, right? Or no, concave. It's concave. So it's inward. So, and there's not a good angle to get at it with a knife or a file. As I mentioned before, you could use like one of the nail Dremel tools. They work, as I recall, okay on Bones USA. You could use one of those and probably get at it just fine. I'm going to get this tiny little bit of green for that tiny little bit. That little tiny bit of mold line I could probably take off, to be fair, but the green is like protesting and sticking to the tool. This is persnickety green today. There, much better. Painting class in the New Jersey area. I'm trying to think who's East Coast. I know the problem can be sometimes, Nitro, that if you don't have a painting community, it can be hard, like in an area, it can be hard to find a good painting class. What, are you looking for a basic class or a more advanced class, Nitro? So I'm just flattening some of this putty out because I have plenty of time to work with it. Then I can get more, once it's safely patted down, I can get more water on the tool. Yeah, exactly, Joe Frick. It's exactly like that. Or a 15-minute, we call them writing sprints when you do it for writing. Basic. Basic's usually a little bit easier. I'm trying to think is, maybe do a Google on miniatures conventions East Coast. I think Little Wars is Pennsylvania. That's a ways from you. Because the easiest place to find classes is going to be either game stores or conventions. And these days, much easier to find painting events at conventions than it is at a local game store, unless you're lucky and have a very active community in your area. Although it is pretty easy these days to find lots of good instruction on YouTube, Nitro. There's a lot of, if you want, actually, I've got some on my channel, but my YouTube has some free videos on the fundamentals of mini painting. So like getting a smooth base coat, mixing a wash, creating your own wash, how to apply it, stuff like that. What's the difference between brushes and palettes and stuff like that. Quindy just spammed you with my stuff. So if you look, the YouTube link is the second link up from the bottom, the cutt.ly. And look for fundamentals of miniature painting. I haven't added to it for a while, but there's, I think, 7 or 8 videos there that will help get you kind of set up with the very, very basics. The only techniques I haven't covered yet for that are more like intermediate techniques like layering, glazing, and wet blending. So those are all the basics. And then there are so many good like miniature painting videos out there on the YouTubes that are free. And if they've got a good camera like I do, that you can get real close and see what they're doing. Yeah, there you go. Rhonda's stream. Rhonda's stream is on Monday, Tuesday? Remind me. I never remember. Yeah. So Rhonda wrote our Learn to Paint kits, Nitro, the Reaper Miniatures Learn to Paint kits, and she's really good at breaking it down. Breaking stuff down so that it's understandable. And she does a stream also on this channel and fields new questions. I also field a lot of beginner questions, so feel free. If you have a specific question, ask away. Monday afternoon at 2 p.m. USA Central. Right, okay. So yeah, so maybe come back on Monday, this coming Monday, at 2 p.m. USA Central time. So for you, that would be 1 hour, so it would be 3 p.m. And if you don't, if you just want to like watch, you can always just catch all of our streams on YouTube. We pop them all over to YouTube for free. You can watch any of them that you want. My own stream tends to be, like I said, a little bit more intermediate as far as what I'm doing, but I often answer beginner questions. So if you have a specific question, ask away. I love to answer those. Mazamune, yeah. Hi, Gary. This is a iPivo. I, P as in Peter, E, V as in Victor, O. It is a VZX, I think, which is the wireless version, but I really didn't need the wireless version, so since I always have it plugged in. But it's a document cam. Document cams are, I think, much better for miniature painting than trying to get a webcam, because a webcam just doesn't do the macro at the high level. I'm so much happier with my document cam since I got it several years ago. And it is about like 4 years old now, so, and it's still going strong. So I've got my stuff tapped down, but you can see how rough it is. So now it's time to get that clay shaper, which is our taper point, 0 size, extra firm clay shaper, the black tipped one. Crowley, what was the... Oh, Crowley asking. Do you know of a paint day, Crowley, or a paint night? So I'm throwing a bunch of water at this now. Look at all that water. And that's because I'm going to bring my silicone tool in, and I'm going to roll it back and forth to blend in these rough areas. The silicone tool is just really smooth, and it's very easy. It makes it very easy to smooth out the green stuff and make it all nice and slick, and make it blend into the surrounding gray. So I'm going to roll back and forth, and I'm going to go back in with my tiny spoon once I've got this more level. And I'm going to pull out those edges to blend them in, and then I'm going to come in with the tool again and pull them out more. The great thing about the clay shaper is I can use the tip to re-sculpt these little folds that are coming in here. And I can also use it to kind of reinforce that edge, although one of my sharper clay shapers would be better for that. So say this guy, the angle chisel, would be better to go in here and cut up that edge, get that edge to really stand out nicely like it's there. Oh, friendly local game store in Brooklyn, Brooklyn Strategist. There's the address for you, Nitro. Crowley just dropped it. It's 333 Court Street in Brooklyn. And they do or used to do painting classes, so check them out. Thanks there, Crowley. Figured we'd add we have a lot of people from different areas of the country on here, so it's great that somebody knew where to look. So I'm going to take this metal tool and just press down very lightly and pull out. And essentially I'm trying to pull out that green. Now I do have a lot of water on here, so at any point I can take my Kleenex and just kind of dab it on the surface. I don't want to take off all the water, but maybe just a little. I want to kind of be able to see. Sometimes the water makes a glare. And so you want to take the water off a little bit so you can roll your sculpting tool back and forth and make sure that you're getting a nice smooth effect. And you can do more like a roll with like the more of the small part of the shaper as well. So we want to just kind of blend this in. It's a little hard to get the right angle, but you can start here and roll up as well, pressing down to blend in the green. There we are. And that's looking pretty okay. A little bit of need to re-accentuate this fold here. Can kind of press down and roll a little bit. See, to bring that fold back out. Don't want to lose our folds. And it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. You can put a big, like a layer of primer over it, for example, any thicker. Primer's usually pretty thick, and if you put them on too much, they can glob detail, but that can work for you when you are working with something where you need to actually lose a little bit of your artifacts from sculpting. Masamune, it probably won't stick to the plastic very well. Air dry clay is brittle and it doesn't stick to things. The reason that Greenstuff is used for a sculpting putty is that it is very sticky. And so when you're trying to do this, it'll stick to the model, but air dry clay I don't think would. It would just flake off. Because this is not actually a clay, this is epoxy. It's just sculptable epoxy. Yeah, I was gonna say like, yeah, Little Wars. Yeah, in Pennsylvania, they also have a big con, don't they? Or that is a con. Yeah. 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 So yeah, you might want to head down to Little Wars. It's a lot of historical stuff, but it also, I think they still have some painting stuff. Yeah, I just was blending in the sleeve, Richard. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to find a place in your backyard, but if you at least have something that's drivable nitro, and if you can't go every week or you can't make many events, then, I mean, the way to do it is just to target, like, what your next technique is going to be. Like, when you learn to get a nice, smooth base coat and you're trying to do shading, you know, then go in and ask questions or do a class. And then, you know, spend a while at home practicing what you've learned and then go back again when you need more input on your next step. And the best question to ask as a new person is, what is my next step to get better? That's a question all of us can ask, even if you're advanced, when you're seeking feedback, is what's my one best step, one next step that I can take or learn to make this model better or to make my painting better. Yeah, that's a good point. Unlike air dry clay, the green is slightly flexible, so if you put it on a bendy piece like a sword, it won't flake off that way. It'll bond to it. Yeah, air dry clay for basing makes sense, although it can be heavy. But it's also cheap, so assuming you can use it before it dries out. It's really not meant for this kind of application, but I mean, a lot of people use Sculpey instead, but Sculpey is a lot more expensive per volume, so it depends on what you're doing. Plaster is another medium that you could use, but not for this sort of thing, but for basing, as I mentioned earlier when I showed David's Iron Man with the cool backdrop of the concrete. That's all done with plaster. So Pretty much if there is a material out there, somebody has tried to use it for miniatures in some way, is the bottom line. Oh, I forgot PAX Unplugged, yeah. Well, good, Nitro. It sounds like you have a local game store that does probably, at least now after the pandemic, does do miniatures events or has in the past, and you can head on over and check it out. I'm glad we were able to help. But yeah, if you have any real like noob questions, go ahead and ask them. I like to answer things. That's the point of this whole stream, actually, is answering questions. I mean, I paint and I do green stuff while I'm here, but we have the best discussions on this stream when somebody asks an interesting question that we can answer. So, and if you need an answer for it, chances are other people watching this stream could also use the information. So it's always good to ask. There. So now we've got a nice shiny fill in. Oh, come on. Painting questions, please, Jofer. But spectral light filtration is your answer. All right. I'm a kind of a sucker for smoothing things out, so I think we're looking pretty good there. Let us go over and start laying out. I'm going to check for any other mold lines that I might need to do that on, but things like this little rough spot down here can be easily gotten at with a file or a knife, so I don't need the putty for that. This is an example of a concave surface, but that one that is easy to get at, and so you only have to do the green stuff fill when it's someplace that's really hard to get at. Like if there was a mold line that went into one of these back folds, that would be another example of where I would do the green stuff. And I've got green stuff here I've got another mold line here on the back of this arm. I had to be careful because I've got all this delicate stuff in place around it. So I might wait till it all sets. But here I can get the knife. I can find a good angle for the knife right here. So I can deal with that later after all this is set. And be able to come back and fix that. And likewise over here on this little end of his thing down here, this is also an easy one to get at. Like it's a little persnickety, but it's not bad. I can slowly scrape away at this irregularity. I could use green also. You could use green if you wanted to. Sometimes when you've got the green mixed up, you just go ahead and do it because you can. It's all good practice. And that's something to always remember. If you never practice these things, you will never get better at them. If you never practice using green, you're never going to get better at it. So sometimes just decide you're going to do it and pay attention while you are doing it. Like look at how fast the green sets up and where you're having trouble and where things are moving well and what tool are you using, stuff like that. So this here's a non-fill. That little area, that is ripe for green stuff. So let's do that, actually. And sometimes when, like I said, when an area is kind of clumpy or bad, I'll go ahead and use green. So let's just use green on both those areas. So I want a little bit of green down here. Just has to get close to where I want it. And a little bit of green on the interior here. So I need to get that close. Now I'm going to get my tiny spoon. Yeah, Big Chimpo. Did you remember the putty catcher? Were you here when I showed the putty catcher? This is what I do with my leftover green. Is I'm just building a base for a model. And every time I have extra green, I add to the rocks and the basing until I have something cool. Then I just have to find a model that goes on it. That's what all the green sculptors I talk to do, is they do putty catchers. Or they just have several models all in process, so they can always add a bit of green to something. But for those of us who are just doing basing and conversion, we often don't have several models in progress, so having one base in progress works great. I probably should get more bases out and just sculpt more ready-made bases, and then I would actually probably do more basing on stream. So again, using the metal tool to tamp the putty down because it's easier to flatten it out with that to start the flat. And then we use our clay roller once we have this filled in. We want to bend this putty around the edge here. Leaving a little notch is fine because that's just like going to be a rip in his cape. That's fine. That's exactly what I'm doing here. Matachine is I had a kind of a place where the cape didn't fill. And here we've got like roughness that's really hard to take off with a knife. So I'm essentially bringing green in. Same thing over here. We had a mold line in the inside of this sleeve that was really hard to take off with files or a knife. And so I decided to green it instead. I'm also going to use this green though to build out her base today. So I've got this little necromancer lady and I want big flagstones instead of the little cobblestones. So I'm going to be doing green on the base. So I use Greenstuff for all of those reasons. Plus sculpting conversions. So if you want to sculpt like a ponytail onto a model with short hair, you would use green. Yeah, I usually fill them with green or a putty, and green is usually my chosen thing because at this point I know how to fill it in, how to make it look nice and smooth. It takes practice to work with green. It is not an easy substance because it's so sticky and it's so goopy, and it also changes as you work with it. So when it first starts, it can be stretched out very thin and blended into the surrounding area, but as it sets up, it becomes impossible to get it to blend in smoothly. So if you're doing something like this where you need it to blend into your model, do it early. Do it right after you mix the green up. Whereas the flagstone stuff that I'm going to do on her base can wait. So this green sitting over here, I don't care if it sets up a little bit and becomes less gooey and less sticky because I'm going to use it for basing. So, but anything like here where you're trying to fill in an imperfection and you need the green to spread out really thin and blend into the surrounding model, then you want to do it earlier in the curing process rather than later. And I use these silicone tools to blend the green in because I find that they give me a nice result, especially in a curved fold area like this. I can really press down and smooth out that area. I'm going to roll it over the edge there and kind of tamp it down. You can see the inside where that there's also an imperfection in here. Now that is just a crack, and I probably can fill that in with primer. But since I have the green out, if it still stays good, I might consider. And there's a mold line that comes down from there. That's over the skull and the base, but that's easy to take off with a knife or file. So I'm not worried about that one. There. Okay, so we got that. Oh, there we go. Yep, Greenstuff. And Reaper's Greenstuff is a good one. Reaper goes through Greenstuff pretty fast. So that means that you're usually getting a really fresh batch from Reaper, and that's why I always order my Greenstuff from Reaper. Pretty much if you ever get the chance to ask somebody who does sculpting or conversion with green, ask them where they get their stuff if they do a lot of it, and they'll usually know because they'll have experience with different places, getting it from different places, which places can be where the green tends to be really fresh because of a high turnover in ordering. And you want it fresher because the longer it sits up in its plastic, the more you're going to lose the putty along that line. And the harder, and it definitely is better fresh. Let's just put it that way. All right, I'm going to get this smoothed in, and then I'm going to come in and deal with the edge there. So I can curve that over, and I can snip off part of that green with my sculpting tool, because I don't need it all. Or I can curve it around. There's a little bit of a mold line on the interior of the sleeves, so I can curve it around there and smoosh it down. Smoosh, 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 smoosh. I still have to order a bog skeleton for the display base for this guy. I'm going to take off. Just if you use your sculpting tool, you can take off a little bit of green. I'll pop it on top of the other one. And actually that little bit of green could come in really handy for something like filling this in. It is Tiny Spoon. Yes, it is. It was made by Jean Van Horn. Julie and Bob also had some sculpting tools with them at the con last year that David brought home for me, but their big leaf tool is a little big for this little tiny area. I feel like I reach for Tiny Spoon for little tiny areas. Every sculptor uses different stuff though, but yeah, this is really easy to make with a ball peen hammer and a brass rod and an anvil. It's the kind of tool that is, and some files maybe or sandpaper to make it smooth if the ball peen hammer doesn't do the trick. But you can tilt it, and it's a tiny spoon. It's my tiny spoon. It's my favorite. Yeah. Green Users has a good tip there. Reaper does not, I don't think we make a wet palette. What we do typically is we work with Game MV, Masamune. So like when we have our swag boxes for ReaperCon, like last year there was a Game MV wet palette in there. The Exemplar, I believe. So at this point, to be honest, there are so many folks making wet palettes that we don't really feel like, I suspect Reaper doesn't feel like it needs to get into the act. There we go. So that's a little better. There we are. Trying to get this figured out. We got a little bit of smoothing good to do. But yeah, so there's definitely a thing in business where if everybody else is doing it, why should you? Unless you can do it better, cheaper, or you have better distribution on it than they do, you're able to reach more people. And you usually want 2 out of 3 on that at least. Then usually it's not worth your while to go into it. At least that's what I always like. Those were my guides. Otherwise, you're just like grabbing at part of the pie that a bunch of other people already have taken big bites out of. And you're not really adding anything to the experience. But I feel like there's some excellent wet palettes out there right now. Plus, you know, a bunch of people who just honestly put their own ghetto wet palette together with a sponge and a piece of parchment and a tray. So yeah, this Reaper is not really entered that market. I would be surprised if we did. Yeah, Exemplar is the Game MV one, yeah. Yeah, there's a bunch of people trying to make a better wet palette, right? And that's great. But to be honest, Master Series paints, I feel, work almost a little better in a well palette rather than a wet palette. I myself am a well palette user. It is a very rare day. Like, I use the ceramic well. It is a very, very rare day when I reach for my wet palette. And when I do, it's usually because I'm trying to make myself use it, just so that I get a decent skill set with it and really can explain like why I like it, why I don't. But in general, I'm a bit of a control freak painter. So for me, I like to control my paint consistency. And I'll tell you guys, like, this is what I tell you about needing the well palette to get really, really super smooth blending. Like, David ran into that for Golden Demon. He has an extremely hard time nailing paint consistency at the micro thin level because his wet palette is always going to be erratic. So it's real. It's a struggle, even for a very high-end painter like David. But he is so used to the wet palette and he's so good with it, there's really no reason. Like, there's only that one thing that he struggles with. And technically he could get there. It's just going to take an awful lot of layering and glazing that he probably doesn't have the patience for and doesn't enjoy. So you kind of always got to look at your goals in painting, look at your style that you know, what tools you enjoy using. Do try both types of palette when you're starting out, because wet palette is not for everybody. A lot of high-end painters like swear by it, but I personally, as I said, I am a high-end painter and I do not. I kind of feel like Kirill, who's one of the best painters in the world, has kind of the right tactic. He uses both palettes, and it just depends on what he's doing. Yeah, it's good for spot mixes and wet blending. It's great for textures, but I just hate how my paint just goes to pieces on it eventually. Even the thicker paints I use, like I can never keep my paint overnight. Like it'll just it'll go to water by the morning, and I honestly get better results by just putting a piece of cling wrap over my well palette and putting a little extra water in the paints overnight. I can keep paint good for 2 or 3 days that way. And I feel like I never can reuse the paint in my wet palette. I always get really irritated at how thin it's gotten. When I used the Masterson wet palette paper, I liked it a little better. It wouldn't get thin. It would actually thicken out because the water would wick through the paper into the sponge instead of staying up on top of the parchment, because their paper is different. But even so, just not ideal. For me, for my painting style. Everybody's different. But that's why I tell people, try both. Try both and decide which you enjoy using the most and which gives you the results that you're aiming for. Because it'll be different for everybody. Riot Boy, the answer to that is to use bigger paint puddles with more water. So I painted in places like Arizona and Santa Fe, which are very arid. And the problem that most people run into with wells, first they're using a well palette that's too big. This is my thumb, and it fits into one of these little wells. Boom, boom. So let me get up here. This is a 28 well ceramic palette. It's from Cheap Joe's Art Supply. You can also find it in Europe. I think there's a supplier that does something like this. But the real answer here is to use at least 6 drops of paint. 4 at the very least. So like most people just put a couple drops of paint in. I'm going to use at least 4. And then I'm going to add at least 2 drops of water most of the time. If I'm using a base coat, I'll put more paint in here and I'll add 1 drop of water. Otherwise, my starting mix is like this. And that's minimum. And usually as I'm building highlights and stuff, I'll actually go more. But you want to have the paint make a deeper puddle, essentially. The deeper the puddle you get, you can see that fills up about, it goes about a third to a halfway up the well, I'd say. But because this puddle is not shallow, because it's deeper, it goes about, maybe a third of the way up this big brush when I dip my brush in. And because all that water's in there, what you're doing is you're limiting the surface area that's exposed to the air, which limits how much evaporation can happen and how fast it can happen. So in an arid climate, I would put 6 drops of paint in, 3 drops of water, and that would stay wet for at least a half an hour to 45 minutes. But most people's mistake with well palettes is they do not use nearly enough paint and water to create the limited surface area they need to keep the paint wet for an hour. And then once you adapt to that, what you'll do is you'll notice when the edges of your paint start getting tacky and starting to dry, and you'll just pop another drop of water in there. Yeah, but Riot Boy, you gotta understand there's like 400 drops on one of these. Like, even the only colors I paint a lot. I paint almost every day. And it still takes me months to go through a bottle of my most used paint, which is pure white. So that idea that the $5 a paint, that scarcity mindset thing, you have a lot of paint in those bottles. A lot. So a couple extra drops isn't going to make much of a dent in there. It's not even 1%. 400 drops. I actually counted them. Some bottles, if the paint is thicker and it comes out in bigger drops, you may go down to 300, but I actually did. When I was in the Reaper, I got this question a lot, and it annoyed me. So I stopped one day, and I just sat there and squeezed drops out of a bottle of paint until I couldn't get any more. And I did it a couple times, and I came to somewhere between 350 and 400 drops. So In fact, if you're like really stingy, the chances are, if you're not shaking your paints and adding water to them, that your paint will dry up before you end up using even half the bottle. So you know, it's all relative. It's all in your head. But yeah, if you can't keep your paint wet, that's why. That's why. You need moisture in there for it to keep wet. Otherwise, if there's only a little tiny bit of paint, there's only a tiny little bit of moisture to keep it wet, and that's why it dries too fast. You're in Europe, Riot Boy? Because that is the problem with Europe. Right, exactly, Matt. So if you just put 4 drops in and you just added the water, it would stay good, and you'd be using the same amount of paint, but you wouldn't be frustrated because it was drying out all the time. Yeah, it's all surface area and evaporation. We're once again back to physics. Oh, you're in the US? reapermini.com. And if you order a certain amount, we give you free shipping. I think, is it $40, Quindy? I don't remember. $40 is pretty easy to... Yeah, there's the store. $40 is pretty easy to hit with paint, but that's the lowest price is straight from Reaper. That is the price. And then, yeah, if the shipping, you can get free shipping and free miniatures, for that matter. Oh, 50 for free shipping, 40 for promo mini. Thank you, guys. So $50 divided by, you know, $4 of paint. If you ordered like 15 paints or 12 paints, you'd get it. Plus, if you ordered miniatures, that would also pump it up. But yeah, so maybe save up until you have enough for a $50 order, and then you can get free. And you'll pay like the standard retail price, not inflated. Yeah, and the promo minis give you a free mini on top of that. And plus, if we're doing paint samples at the time, you may even get a free bottle of paint. You can go even higher on this kind of thing over the holidays when we do like ghoulie bags and goodie bags for Christmas and Halloween. Just making sure I don't have any fingerprints on there. I've got this smoothed out so we can get a little closer here. Let's get real close. So we've got a nice smooth blend here. You can see it's just blending into that. Here's a little rocky, but I don't mind a little bit of irregularity on that edge because you can always have a notch in his cape. He is kind of a grody old necromancer kind of guy. And I'm going to work just a little bit more on smoothing out this top of this fold. Acrylic medium. Okay, so use terminology. Mediums are things you typically add to paint, right? So are you talking paint bases? Like what the paint is made in? Or are you talking mediums like matte medium, gloss medium that are added to the paint to do something to it? What you talking about? Define for me. Yeah. Yeah, well, and what oils can and can't do. Neither medium is magic. James has decades of experience with oils, and he's probably the best person with oils in the miniatures hobby. Period, hands down. Even all those historical guys who've been using them for ages can't hold a candle to James, in my opinion. But nothing is magic. Oils enable some things, but they make other things very difficult. And acrylics enable some things and make other things difficult. And they're pretty much opposites. As in material. Yeah. Okay, so that's the base, is what we call it in paint chem terms. The base is the basic combination of resins, polymers, water, silicates, and surfactants. Surfactants are what's holding everything together. Silicates are usually used as a matting medium and also can be also a keep in solution kind of thing. The resin is the base polymer that is going to fix the paint, fix the pigment, so it doesn't come out of solution when you add water. Polymers that are used, they used to be latex, acrylic, and vinyl, were 3 of the big ones. Since that time, they've gone away from actual vinyl, actual latex because allergens, but they now use synthetic compounds that are essentially equivalent to those, or they've got something that's hand brewed to be somewhere on the line between those equivalents. So that's how we got latex acrylic house paint, because it was really latex acrylic back in the day. Now it's a polymer that's similar to latex. So when you're dealing with those different things along the road, most miniature paints nowadays are made with something that is bigger and softer, like a vinyl. And the reason for that is coverage. Your base and your pigment will give you your coverage. So the thickness, viscosity of your base, together with the size of the polymer particulate, plus the pigment that you're using, because pigment grinds, just like polymer particles have sizes. The bigger the size, the more coverage you will get, but the easier the paint will fall out of solution when thinned. So essentially, yeah, Wapple, because Wapple's a pro who's been doing oils for as long as I've been doing acrylics. So, yeah. I mean, I can do oils because I actually did oils back in school. I liked oils better than acrylics. And I started an oils model. Then I fell out of it because I was sick of using solvents. Solvents always drive me away from oils. It's why I have my water-soluble oils. But I was using the scale color oils because I had bought them and I was having fun with colors. But yeah. So yeah. Everything comes down to actually a very intuitive concept, which is particle size. And all of these particles are less than a micron in size, which means you can't see them with your naked eye. A micron is about the limit of what the human eye can actually detect. Everything that's used in pigments and paints is smaller than that. But within that range of smaller than that, the closer it is to a micron, the better coverage or hiding you're going to get out of it. And the smaller it is, the more transparent, but also the harder and more durable you're going to get. So, for example, Vallejo, back in the day, 20 plus years ago when I was using Vallejo before I started at Reaper, Vallejo was a very soft paint. If you thinned it, it would get stringy and it would rub off very easily. It didn't have a lot of adhesion or durability, and that's because it was high coverage, because Vallejo as a company started out making cell paint for animation. Cell paint you need to cover absolutely in one coat, and so you're using a very high particle size resin, closer to a vinyl, but it's softer. It doesn't matter if you're doing film slides, cell slides, if you have a soft paint. In fact, it's probably good because you're probably bending the film, right? And you don't want the paint to flake off and be brittle. But when you're doing miniatures and you're thinning, that's a whole different ball game, because then that heavy resin sinks, the paint separates if you thin it, a lot easier. And it also is less durable. So the closer you get on that scale to acrylic from vinyl, acrylic is much harder. A lot of us know that just in our gut, because we're used to seeing acrylic lacquers and stuff, right? Really hard, really shiny, but very transparent. And latex and its polymer equivalents are somewhere in the middle. So all of today's paints hobby paints range somewhere on that to an equivalent, and most of the time it is actual acrylic too these days, I think. It's not, sometimes it's a proprietary polymer, but depends on who you're dealing with. So yeah. So let me just catch up on chat here. Yeah. Well, Wapple uses synthetic brushes because you need to with oils. I learned that real quick when I went back in with oils. I actually switched to using a sable for the real thin stuff I was doing, real fine stuff. But in general, I agree that for your basics, you want a good synthetic for oil, which you don't necessarily want for acrylic. But yeah, so that's, and pigments are the same. Titanium white has the highest particle size, so it it gives you coverage. That's why some paint lines back in the day would add a little bit of white to every color, and it was hard to find really, really bright colors, and when you did, they had no coverage. And that's just an intrinsic property of the pigment. So that's why back in, centuries ago, canvas painters prized certain pigments like cadmium red, because they knew that red pigments didn't have a lot of coverage, but cadmium red did. And so they chose things like that. Every pigment had a different coverage, in addition to ultramarine is always going to be transparent. Even synthetic ultramarines are transparent. Things like that. So that's what I talk about on this stream day out and day out, Robert Bright Boy. Obviously, at that point, I've told you that if you run into a thick, heavy base, it has a higher chance to fall out of solution when thinned, and it's probably not going to be as durable. I run into this with Scale Color Artist. I don't run into the separation thing. So what I think they're doing is probably using some sort of polymer that's in the middle. So it doesn't separate when I thin it, but they definitely have thickening agents, right? They're using a thick paste base because it's a tube paint. And so what I do notice is it's not really meant to be thinned down. And when I thin it to the point that I use it, which is very thin indeed for glazing and building up layers, I do notice that it is fragile and will rub off easily. And that's relative. Now, I run my paint thinner than most people do. I run really, really thin paint because that's what I enjoy. So a lot of people don't notice the rub-off problem because it's not a problem. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And the Chimera colors, I haven't tested to see about the rub-off on those. That's the other paint line I've been playing with a lot. This is all Chimera that I did just a while ago, just to play with it. The pain with the Chimera is that it has real troubles layering smoothly, especially the reds. Yeah, but if I have to layer, I'm not going to use the Chimeras. I'll use the warm yellow from Master Series instead. Same color. But yeah, I'm using a lot of Chimera these days. Which is great because it means I actually get to learn the paint line and its strengths and weaknesses. The Chimeras are very vibrant because they're using a base that can carry a really heavy pigment load. And that is a thing that also is different, is what kind of base are you using will determine how much pigment can be loaded into it and still have the paint set, right? Because you still need the paint to not come up when you put more layers of paint over it or when it gets wet or whatever, right? So you need it to bond the pigment in there so that it doesn't rub off or come up. And some bases are better at that than others. Some bases can carry a much higher pigment load than others. So with the Chimera, they're using a base. Their base is essentially able to carry a very, very heavy pigment load. So they get really vibrant colors. Do be aware that many of these are transparent. They'll usually say it on the bottle when they are. At a practical level, if you are like me, or you come from an art school background, Riot Boy, I can mix anything with 12 colors. Any paint in the line I can make with 12 colors. So when I travel, I take a lot of single pigments with me. And then if there are a couple of paints that I'm working with on the particular model I bring with me to a con that are a pain to mix by hand, because that does happen, then I'll just bring a bottle of that. So the advantage is to being able to mix. One, you can come up with some beautiful colors that you otherwise wouldn't find in a bottle because just like a happy happenstance with mixing happens. You'll get some cool effects sometimes, and you'll be like, wow, I love this color, and there's no way anybody makes an exact match for this color that I just mixed, right? Somewhat walking. The oxides tend to have higher coverage, and if the pigment has a high particle size, it's going to have good coverage. I can answer this question. 1 second. Let me get my cards. One moment. I can show you this. So there's a difference between a pigment that's really transparent and a pigment that is not. So when I got my Chimeras, the first thing I did was to swatch them onto a piece of white cardstock, watercolor stock. So you can see, as I bring these guys up, let's get close here. Let's bring these guys into... And these are straight out of the bottle, but you can definitely see that some of them you can see the brush strokes. Some of them you can see right through. That's the alizarin crimson. So you know that's somewhat transparent. You can see the transparency in the purple. The magenta is actually super transparent, but the reason you're not getting that is the thickness of the base. You can still see that it is showing through a bit on the edge there, even full out of the bottle. On the other hand, toluidine red down here is pretty darn flat and opaque. You can see that honeymoon yellow and yellow oxide are somewhat transparent. Cold yellow is transparent, but it's not reading that way because against the white card, it makes it look a little bit better. moving over to like these guys, you can see that my ultimate favorite color from Chimera, Royal Brown, definitely has a bit of transparency to it. Surprisingly, the dark brown oxide does as well. That surprised me because brown oxides, as you can see here, are typically very high coverage, especially the medium one. Red oxide has super high coverage because it's got a high pigment size. But then you come down here to the Mars Orange and the dark yellow oxide, you can see the yellows are just a little bit not as high coverage of oxides. Usually, though, when you're dealing with browns and reds, you've got that super high coverage. Yeah, Royal Brown is mummy brown. Non-mummy mummy is what I call it. I love it. Yep, that is true, Riot Boy. And the way that pigment grinds work is that once a substance is identified as a colorant, they will experiment. Essentially, that's why you hear about colors being discovered, new pigments being discovered by luck. Essentially, they'll be grinding a polymer, some kind of mineral or chemical. They'll be grinding it to make something else, and it'll turn a funky color at a certain point. And the things that can influence this are whether it's being coarsely ground, finely ground, or heated. All these things can influence color. So for each of the colors that we are used to, such as naphthol red, quinacridone magenta, all those pure pigments, right, that people are very familiar with, there is an ideal length, type, and temperature of pigment grind to get that color. So that means in order to get your yellow, you must grind that substance at X, X coarse, X fine, and at X temperature to get that color. And if you don't do that, you don't get that vibrant color. So that means that essentially pigment grinds are determined, like you can't change them. You can't choose to grind alizarin crimson less and maybe get better coverage. It just ain't gonna happen. You have to grind it in a certain way to get that color. So that's why, I'm sure you do, Luca, I'm sure you do. So that's why you run into that. Now, that said, nowadays, there are variations on those pigments because surfaces chemists are always trying to come up with a way to make things better, right? Chemistry is always trying to make it better. So they have come up with a way to make higher coverage reds. So you see like the red here, this is essentially an equivalent to naphthol red, but it's got pretty decent coverage. It's maybe a bit more. And we at Reaper use high density pigments, which also are pigments that have been altered that way to make them cover a little bit more. So we're getting there, but and those, by the way, when you see a fake cadmium red, which most cadmium reds just aren't available nowadays because toxicity. So when you see cadmium red hue, that high density pigment of red is what they're using to create that cadmium. Yeah, so I've been asking, thanks, Miniatures Den, for sticking Riot Boy on me, and now I've spent the last 15 minutes talking about paint chemistry. Well, it happens. Well, yeah, but it's like, it's getting rarer, right? Like a lot of paint companies are putting out a cadmium red hue now because you can get cadmium, and if you want it, you can have it. Although cadmium red, really, it's so tomatoey. Why would you use that? Like cadmium orange is beautiful, but I hate the red. Automotive paints are a whole different thing, Big Chimpo, because they are solvent-based. You can do all sorts of funky things with flakes, with metal flakes, when you are solvent-based, but not water-based. Sometimes when you add a solvent-based flake to water, it will explode. I almost had that happen once. Luckily, I always read the fine print on new samples. So that gives you kind of an idea to think about it, Riot Boy. So now when you try a paint and it's really thick and you mix it up and you notice that it falls out of solution when you add a lot of water, you can think, oh, the resin size is bigger, but that means this is going to be a really good coverage paint, so I can use it for things like wet blending and base coating and things like that, where coverage is a virtue, right? But maybe I don't want to do really fine layering or try to glaze with it because it's falling out of solution so badly. Things like that. And also remember that transparency and translucency are virtues, not faults. In today's market, we get hit with coverage a lot, but that is not the end of the game. yeah, so. Difference between two sets Master Series and core colors and bones. Okay. Yep. The core colors is the first line I made back when I was starting at Reaper. It was meant to be a kind of a competition line from Vallejo. It's MSP Core. MSP Core is the coverage of the paint is definitely influenced heavily by the color. So you'll notice a different, like a range of coverage essentially when you use core colors. Core colors also are organized in triads. So there's a shadow, a midtone, and a highlight in every 3 paints. There are also some triads that are like colors. So like the off-whites triad, for example. So that's core Dukesy. And then bones was what I made when, where's my bones paint? That's Pathfinder. Oh, here we go. So bones was what I made when Ed wanted a bones branded paint line. And we already had at that point a line called HD, which was high density, which was we were messing around with those high density pigments that I just mentioned to Riot Boy. So we used higher density pigments to create a slightly higher coverage. That's why it's called ultra coverage. Slightly higher coverage line that still had good vibrancy, use, and thinability. Just a little bit more focused on getting a smaller paint set that was pretty self-contained and that had slightly better coverage out the gate. So like the oranges and yellows are very good in bones. For example, like lantern yellow here that I use all the time, and then sunrise orange. They're in volcanic, or orange, not volcanic. I don't remember. Yeah, I think it's volcanic orange. But they've got some great coverage on the reds and oranges and some of the greens. So that's where you're really, and these are not in triads. So they do not have a midtone highlight shadow organization. So that's otherwise they intermix great. I use equal amounts of all. So I use probably Pathfinder, Bones, and because Pathfinder line is also Reaper, I use an equal amount of all of these. Oh, where's my bones? Bones. There's bones. So, and it just depends. It just depends on where, like my yellows and oranges are all bones. And then Pathfinder has some really unique colors in it that you can't find in other lines, just because when they gave me the swatches to execute on, there were some colors that I hadn't thought to put in Master Series, so that's nice. The other nice thing about MSP Core is that it's got a huge selection of colors in it. Yeah, priming black maybe. Usually a black is the least expensive color because carbon is everywhere. It's lamp black is pretty much carbon black, so lamp black is the most inexpensive pigment, typically Pendrake, and thus can be the least expensive color. Most expensive tend to be the blues and the reds. But it depends, because phthalocyanine blues can be a little bit less expensive, so it depends on what. But yeah. So really, just pick colors you like. If you were going to start with just like a line, like the first 54 colors of either of those lines, do you see? I would say Bones, because I felt like Bones was pretty much my pinnacle as a paint line designer. I had a lot of knowledge that I brought into that line, and we used some new technology with it. So I feel like if you were going to buy like the first 54 colors, like the first paint set of either Bones or Core, I feel like Bones is a better set for starting out. Although there are definitely colors from Core that I use all the time and could not live without. At least you lurk. If you lurk, you're adding to our Twitch numbers, Brian Boy, so I'll consider that payment. Yeah, it's Reaper. Buying whole sets of Reaper is best to go through us direct at reapermini.com. You're going to get free shipping on that for sure, unless you're in Europe. That makes it harder. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, good, Dukesy. Good. Yeah, just remember that the Reaper paints need less thinning than most other paint lines because they're more fluid out of the bottle. They're pretty much the same quantum, which is why you may have noticed that canceled HD colors made their way later into Bones. So the first 54 colors of Bones and of Core are pretty much made to be a self-contained set. After that, we just filled out the lines. So filling out Bones we ported in a bunch of HDs that were still popular, more popular than most. HD got canceled because it just wasn't popular. At that point, I didn't have all the tech I needed to make like fairly bright colors that still had decent coverage. So after we got the high density line, and I experimented a bit more, and then I came out with Bones, I feel that Bones is probably the best thing I did as a paint line designer. And a lot of the HD colors got a rework and pulled in to the Bones line. It just fit in our paint rack, Madasheen. Like the first paint rack we had was like divisible, like a certain number of rows, and it came out to 54 colors. Which then screwed us up later when we got a new paint rack and it was 56. Which is the Pathfinder line. Pathfinder line is 56 colors. Yeah, Griffin Tan. I know, Cornico. Pathfinder set are different from Bones and MSP. Yes. Pathfinder is when we took on the Pathfinder line idea from Paizo, they chose Pantone colors, specific Pantone colors for their world and characters, and I had to copy those Pantone colors. And then they got to approve them all. So the Pathfinder line, because they came at it from a totally different direction, almost all those colors are pretty unique. Some of them are very close, like Sione Scarlet's going to be really close to Clear Red, but they're all slightly different. It's just sometimes you wouldn't even notice the amount of difference in them as a painter who's just using a paint. But yeah, I feel like HD had some great colors, but a lot of my favorites got ported into Bones anyway, so now it's in the later part of the Bones line. So yeah. Okay, well, it's time to turn this over to Luca. Like, it's been way too long. He's gotten a mini vacation because I've been talking. He's used to this, though. So, Luca, the only weeks that I'm actually on time are the weeks that then Quinty goes, oh, no, Luca today. But yeah, so no problem if you guys have questions about the paints. I love to, yes, it is not straightforward. It was pain in the butt, Big Chimpo. Pain in the butt. Murphy's Law, yep. Oh, good, Zachariah. I'm glad you're enjoying my novel. Yay, yes, I just published my first book, everybody. And many people are actually reading it and leaving reviews, which I'm so thankful for, because your reviews matter a lot on places like Amazon and Goodreads. So thank you to everybody who's reading it. And if you leave a review, I will be over the moon. Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, there we go. Quindy helping out Crows and Bones. All right, I'm going to end this and throw you all over to Luca, much to your chagrin or your delight, depending on who you are. Thanks very much, everybody. And, oh, good. Yay, Big Chimpo. Thank you. Yes. All right, I got to go. My puppy is squeaking at me. She wants to go for her walk. Have a good time on your stream, Luca. And thanks, everybody. And I'll see y'all tomorrow.